Welcome to this week's lecture. So this week we're going to be talking about evolution by natural selection, and this is only going to be one lecture this time. And for the lab work, you're going to do a demonstration through an online service. So this is going to be your only lecture you're getting today. When we're going to be talking about the evolution by natural selection, the core concept I want you to understand is that evolution is within a population is the driving force of life. It's what created everything we have here, and it's real. It's not invented. It's not a theory. I mean, it is a theory, but we don't need to be splitting hairs here about whether it's a theory according to science and what a theory means in English class. The reality is what you see out there, the reality of what you see out there can be explained by evolution. I'm not asking you not to believe in God. God can put evolution in place. If he can create life, he can create evolution to go along with it. The reality is all of us share DNA with the tree, and it really is what explains both the diversity and the similarities we see between organisms. So the general principles of evolution are that all living organisms share a common ancestor. Evolution doesn't say anything about the creation of Earth. It only talks about life. These lineages of organisms can be determined based on shared DNA sequences. We used to look at animals and plants, we grouped them by shared characteristics, and that works to a point, but the DNA sequences actually are a better way to compare them, and you'll see how that goes. These characteristics of populations change over time due to changing allele frequencies, consequences of mutations, natural selection, gene flow, and genetic drift. And we'll talk about all of those things a little bit. But the first thing I want you to one of the driving forces is natural selection. And let's talk natural selection for a moment. So the four postulates of Darwin, of evolution by natural selection, it's four simple things that make this work. Individuals within a species vary. These individuals, because of those variations, they vary in their ability to survive and reproduce. Some of these variations, and the ones that drive natural selection and evolution, some of these variations are passed on to the offspring. And the ones that are the most likely to survive are those most favorable adaptations are the ones that are passed on. Those are the most likely to survive and reproduce. This is where this idea of fitness comes in, but we'll give an example first of how this evolution by natural selection works, or how this natural selection works. So you've got on the right here, you've got a picture of some beetles, and some of these beetles are brown, and some of them are green. In the environment that you have with this beige background, the green beetles don't survive as well as the brown beetles because the green beetles can be seen more easily by the birds. And when we do this class in lab, we actually do an activity where we have pom-poms, black and pink pom-poms in two different environments, in black environment and in the pink environment. And we have students pick out those black and pink pom-poms. Well, so with these beetles, if the color is heritable, then since dead beetles don't have babies, the brown beetles will have babies, and so more brown beetle babies are going to be produced. And so that makes brown here an advantageous trait. And over time, the population of brown beetles is going to be more likely to be there. We see this in action, and one of the stories I like to tell is the case of the peppered moth. Peppered moths come in two varieties, and these two varieties, and you'll see it here. You'll see it on the right. We have a dark tree, and you almost don't see. Here's the white moth, and you almost don't see the dark moth on that dark tree. Now here is a white tree or a whiter tree, and you can easily see the dark moth, but they actually had to circle the white one so that you can actually see the white one. So this population of moths actually comes in these two color varieties. And the two color varieties are both within the population. So they're genetically, depending on what allele one of these moths gets, it's either going to be white or it's going to be. And natural selection only determines allele frequency within a population. So in England, pre-industrial England, these moths live primarily on birch trees, and birch trees are white. So in pre-industrialized England, you saw a lot of these moths were white. The frequency of the white allele was way greater than the frequency of the black one, because the black ones got eaten off those white birch trees. So then the industrial evolution came along. And everything, because everything was being fired with coal, the trees, everything turned black. The trees turned black. The birch trees were sooty, and so all the trees were black. The houses were black. The streets were black. And all of a sudden, the frequency of the black moths went up. Because the white moths were much more visible on the trees, and so the allele frequency of the black allele went up because of natural selection, because the white ones got picked off selectively. The very, very interesting part about this story is that as laws came to into place, that kept that forced the industries to do better with regards to their soot. The trees went back to their normal white color, and as the trees went back to their normal white color, the white moths all of a sudden became more prevalent again. So depending on the environment, depending on what the environmental pressures are, the white moths became the better, had the better adaptation, had the better fitness. And I'm gonna have to say this a couple of times, fitness when it comes to evolution has something to do with how well adjusted something is for the environment. That may mean that they can run faster, but fundamentally it has nothing to do with fitness, as in like strength and you can run faster and you can swim faster or whatever. It means you're best suited. Fitness is like it fits into the environment. It doesn't. It has to do with fit, not with fitness. Now, this variation that we see in populations, the only variations we're concerning ourselves with in evolution by natural selection is heritable characteristics. So those can be passed from parents to the offspring. This variation is caused by a number of different things. It can be caused by changes in DNA. Sometimes a small change can have a large effect, and in your demonstration online today, there's a mutation that has an effect, and you see what that effect has over time. Gene flow or migration, which is a movement from genes from one population to another. And sexual reproduction, which can introduce new gene combinations into a population. when we're talking about fitness, it's an ability of an organism to survive or reproduce and produce offspring. So the offspring has to be fertile. It doesn't. So it's all about. I usually tell the story. It's all about the grandchildren. Those of you who have children know it's all about the grandchildren. We love our children, but they're really only a means to an end. And this fitness depends on the environment. So you have to be suited to the environment. So rabbits have white coats in the winter because it helps them blend into the snow. So the ones that had the mutation that caused the white coats, they were the ones that managed to get through the winter. So they were the ones that managed to survive in the to the spring to make more babies. Whereas the ones that got picked out by the wolves in the snow, they didn't make it through the winter. So the mutation of having white coats in the winter was something that increased the fitness of this animal. Penguins, they don't produce many young, but they invest a lot of parental care to ensure that they survive, that the young that they have survive to the next generation. So if, you know, an early penguin had a mutation where it would leave its eggs alone, the eggs would freeze, especially in the colder environment. And so they wouldn't survive, and so they couldn't reproduce. The peacocks, there's a lot of interesting stuff about characteristics that creatures have developed in order to that have to do with mate finding, and the peacock feathers are one of those things, because if you're a female, when you're looking for a mate, there's a couple of things that are important. One, you have to find somebody who's strong and, you know, healthy and whatever, who can help you maybe raise these babies or make healthy babies with you. The other thing is you have to find somebody who is the same species that you are. And so by making perfectly clear that, hey, I'm one of you, those signals are really important, because for a female, there's a lot of cost involved in making babies. And not only do you have to produce the baby, but it also keeps you from being able to produce another one during the time that you're incubating the one that you've got. And I don't know what my dog is doing, but she's making a lot of racket in the background. So if you're wondering what the noises are, that's my dog. So this adaptation, I've already told you about this. The adaptation are those characteristics that increase an organism's fitness. So a katydid, for example, is green. And so most of the katydids that you find out in nature are green. Now, the really interesting things about katydids is that green is actually not the dominant color. If you raise katydids in a terrarium, you will actually find that they're overwhelmingly, they all of a sudden become pink. They can be all kinds of colors, and there's an article that I'm linking that shows that katydids actually have all kinds of color alleles that you just don't see in nature, because that's not a good adaptation. Then these creosote bushes, the problem that plants have is they get eaten. And so they develop all kinds of, there's all kinds of adaptations that plants have that have helped them survive. And so the creosote bush produces a toxin that prevents the growth of plants around it. And that's an adaptation that this plant has developed. Bats have developed and this is, you know, they didn't develop this in order to, right? Bats, there was a mutation that allowed them to be able to find food with echolocation. And because of that, because the mutation happened, and because they suddenly developed this ability to do something different, they were able to access a resource that nobody else could access. So they were able to hunt in caves, and therefore were able to find food that other creatures couldn't find. They could hunt at night and could access features that other creatures couldn't access. So some important concept here is it only works if the traits are heritable, and it only works if they contribute to differences in fitness, so in adaptation, right? There may be traits that are within our human population, for example, that don't contribute to differences in fitness today, but they may contribute to difference in fitness in the future. Let's, for example, say somebody may have a mutation that makes them not get sick from COVID-19. Let's say we don't find a vaccine for COVID-19, right? We can't be locked up inside for the rest of our lives. So eventually we're going to have to venture back outside. If this thing makes us all so sick that we can't go on, and there's somebody out there who is not sensitive to it, who can survive it without any problem, then they're going to be having an advantage compared to everybody else. Now, that oftentimes doesn't become clear that somebody has this advantage, and so their allele may be part of the society, but not be a big player until something tragic happens, like some disaster. And in your demonstration in the lab, you can actually do that. There's disasters that happen, and you can look at the effect that it has on population. Evolution by natural selection mostly is gradual, and it takes lots and lots of generation to have that. Evolution changes the frequency of alleles in populations, and not at an individual level. So it's not about the individual. So if somebody tells you, I've never seen evolution in action because I've never seen a bug turn into a bird, or whatever the case may be, that is correct. Evolution only says that you have common ancestors with the bug. And natural selection depends on the environment. So as the environment changes, the selection pressures may change. Now, populations can be at equilibrium, meaning that you don't really see big changes that are going on. So this happens if populations are very large, and if individuals can mate without limitation because they're at the same place at the same time. There's no selection against certain alleles. There's no net migration into or out. And there's no major mutations or the mutations are compensatory. Now, you've probably heard as evolution as a force to create organisms. You've heard of this evolution as this descent from a common ancestor with modifications along the way. And so one of the things that we see out there is that there are distinct groups of organisms that are all related in some way, shape, or form. And we can take these groups of organisms and we can actually arrange them in a tree of life that shows how they're all related and how they have changed over time. And the classification schemes that, there's an older classification scheme that was made by Linnaeus. It's trait-based, where living things were grouped according to the differences in the way organisms express basic characteristics of life. So cellular or tissue organization, nutritional metabolism, the development of reproduction, the habitat preference, and the way they move. And based on that, we had 5 kingdoms. So the binomial nomenclature that we still use is the genus and species. That's how we still describe organisms. And based on that, all organisms were distributed into one of 5 kingdoms: the Monera, the Protista, the fungi, the plantae, and the animalia. The revised classification schemes, which is the phylogenetic tree, which it groups things based on the degree of shared DNA homology. Initially, this was based on ribosomes, because ribosomes are evolutionary extremely conserved. They're very stable. They're not laterally transferred. And there's sequence divergence and conservation that you can see that's pretty amazing. We now group things into 3 domains. The domain because we didn't have the bacteria and the archaea as different domains, but we found there's so much variety within them that they really need their own group. So there's the domain bacteria, which contains the bacteria and the blue-green algae, and the domain archaea, which is the archaic bacteria, or also called extremophiles. Those are the ones that live in the, in the hot springs and that kind of stuff. And then the eukaryotes, which are the ones with the nucleus. Those are several kingdoms of protists, which are unicellular eukaryotes, and a couple of multicellular ones. Then we've got the kingdom Plantae, which is the multicellular plants, the kingdom Fungi, which is the molds, the mushrooms, and the yeasts, and the kingdom Animalia, which is the multicellular animals, which we are a part of. Now, when you arrange these things into a tree, the root always represents the ancestral line, and then when you have a tip, that's when you have a branch point, that means that's where they split off. And so anything that comes from this comes from that ancestor over this way. And then this one would be like a unique ancestor of C. This is a common ancestor of B and C, etc., etc. We group these, like for example, a way to group and look at the differences between organisms in the phylum Chordata is, so you've got the vertebrae, that's a speciation in so everybody after here has a vertebra. But sharks don't have a bony skeleton, so they go off in this way. They're said to go off in this way. Whereas the bony skeleton, everybody up here has a bony skeleton. Now everybody up here has 4 limbs. Everybody from here on has an amniotic egg, including birds. And us. Everybody beyond here has hair. Everybody beyond here has 2 post-orbital fenestrae. And then, obviously we create, the reptiles go here, crocodiles go here, and dinosaurs and birds go over here. Which the dinosaurs have been a very interesting story. Because the dinosaurs, when I was a kid, were considered reptiles. And we've clearly changed our mind about that one. So one of the things to keep in mind when we're looking at identifying characteristics that underlie a speciation event is there are homologous structures and analogous structures. So homologous structures are ones that actually come from a common ancestor. Analogous structures are the ones that have a similar function, and sometimes they're forced by similar environments, but they have a different, but they don't have an ancestral structure. For example, between bird and bat wings, they have the same they have the same function. They have the same function because they both allow birds and bats to fly, but they don't have the same internal structure. So they don't have the same ancestor, right? The same thing is true with insect wings, right? Insect wings and bird wings, they're also the same, but they're different because they don't have the same ancestor with the same structure. when you're looking at the whales and sharks, for example, those are analogous, not homologous structures. Now, the presence of 4 limbs, on the other hand, is a homologous trait that's shared between amphibians, primates, rodents, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds. Now, when you look at the sequence comparison to classify organisms, this is what this would look like. So the turquoise is conserved between all of them. So this is a 16 rRNA signature sequence. So the turquoise sequence that you see is conserved between everybody, like everybody from a bacterium all the way to a human. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? The parts in the yellow, that's the way the eukaryotic species, the eukaryotes are. The prokaryote specific sequence is is over here. So that is not served between those groups. And then within prokaryotic taxa, there's a couple of purple differences that you see there too. And yeah, so this is what one of those sequence comparison looks like. You're going to see some sequence comparison stuff. You're going to see some speciation things in the demonstration. So I'm hoping that this is going to prepare you well for your demonstration.